The scent of lilacs and freshly cut grass filled the air as Olivia Monroe pulled into the narrow driveway of her childhood home, a modest blue Craftsman tucked into a sleepy street in Willow Creek, where nothing ever changed and everyone still waved at passing cars. The engine purred to a stop, but she lingered a moment, her fingers curled tightly around the bouquet of sunflowers on the passenger seat. It had been nearly a year since she'd last seen Grace, her adoptive mother, face to face. Life in the city had swallowed her whole. Early mornings at the firm, late nights staring at spreadsheets. But Mother's Day wasn't something she missed. Not for Grace. Never for Grace. She stepped out of the car, heels crunching against gravel, and climbed the creaking porch steps like muscle memory. Before she could even knock, the door swung open. "Liv!" Grace gasped, eyes wide with shock and joy, her apron still dusted with flour. She rushed forward and wrapped Olivia in the kind of hug that pressed the breath right out of her lungs. "I thought I'd surprise you," Olivia laughed against her mother's shoulder. "Happy Mother's Day." They moved inside where everything looked frozen in time. The floral couch, the faded lace curtains, even the ceramic angel on the windowsill that Olivia used to talk to when she was little. Grace had made lemon squares, Olivia's favorite. They spent hours flipping through old photo albums, laughing at Olivia's gap-toothed kindergarten smile, recalling the time she glued pasta to the dog in second grade. Everything was perfect, nostalgic, whole, until Olivia spotted the envelope. It was sitting in a wooden tray near the front door, slipped halfway beneath a stack of mail. The handwriting was careful, almost old-fashioned, and the name on the front stopped Olivia cold. "Emily." She held it up. "Who's Emily?" Grace's smile faltered. For a second, barely a second, a shadow passed over her face. "Oh," she said too quickly. "Probably a mix-up. You know how mail gets misdelivered around here." But her hands were already moving. Too fast, too nervous, as she reached to take it. Her fingers trembled. Her skin had gone pale. Olivia stared at her. Something in her gut twisted. She didn't know why. Just something was off. The letter was small. Innocent even. But in that moment, in that brief flicker of panic in Grace's eyes, the warmth of the day seemed to fade. The sunflowers on the table began to wilt, just slightly, under the weight of a name Olivia had never heard before, one that felt strangely, impossibly familiar. The letter sat on the kitchen counter, unopened, like a fuse waiting to be lit. Olivia hadn't pushed the issue when Grace slid it out of her hands with an awkward smile and tucked it under a stack of utility bills, but something about the name Emily gnawed at her. She told herself to drop it, to focus on the lemon squares and the photo albums and the warm, glowing version of family she had always known. But curiosity doesn't sleep. Later that evening, when Grace disappeared upstairs to take a quick bath, Olivia wandered back into the kitchen under the guise of grabbing more tea. Her hand moved with surprising decisiveness as she pulled the letter from the pile and flipped it over. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy, the kind used for formal correspondence, not the kind neighbors use for birthday cards or misplaced mail. She hesitated only a second longer, then slipped her finger beneath the seal and tore it open. Inside were two documents. The first was a copy of a birth certificate. Not hers. Not Olivia Monroe. Emily Rose Whitaker. Born May 9, 1997. Mother, Rachel Whitaker. Father, not listed. The second was a notarized letter requesting identity confirmation. It referenced an inquiry into closed adoption records and mentioned that Emily Rose Whitaker may be alive and possibly living under another name. Olivia's knees buckled slightly as she sank into a chair. Her name wasn't on the paper, none of her was in there, but the birth date matched. The birth date Grace celebrated every year with breakfast in bed and little cards signed, "Love, Mom." She felt her pulse pounding in her ears, like distant thunder. "Grace?" She called up the stairs, her voice paper-thin. No answer. Footsteps followed a minute later. Grace appeared in a robe, towel wrapped around her head, rubbing at her neck with a familiar comfort, but her eyes locked on the papers in Olivia's hands, and everything about her froze. "You opened it," she said, not a question. "What is this?" Olivia's voice cracked. "Who is Emily? Why is my birth date on this certificate?" Grace moved slowly, as though every step weighed her down. She sat across from Olivia, pressing her hands flat against the table like she could keep herself from unraveling. It's nothing you need to worry about," she said gently, but her eyes, once so calm and maternal, were filled with panic. "Just some mistake. Bureaucratic nonsense. People dig into things that don't concern them. Scams. Hoaxes." But Olivia had known Grace her whole life. She knew her micro-expressions, her nervous habits, the way her voice changed when she lied, and Grace was lying. "I want the truth," Olivia said, sharper now, rising. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Grace didn't speak. Didn't deny it, just sat there, silent, as the weight of 3 unspoken decades pressed down on them both. The air in the kitchen turned heavy. Outside, the wind stirred the trees like a warning. Olivia clutched the birth certificate tighter, as if the truth might vanish if she let it go. But it was already too late. The truth had arrived, in an envelope she was never meant to see, and it had shattered everything she thought she knew about who she was, and who Grace really was. The name echoed in Olivia's mind like a song she couldn't turn off. Emily Rose Whitaker. She whispered it to herself in the mirror that night, trying it on like a stranger's coat. Unfamiliar, awkward, but eerily snug. She barely slept. Her mind spiraled, clawing at memories that now felt flimsy and suspicious under new light. Who was she? Really? Was Olivia Munro just a name she'd been given like a new pair of shoes? Something chosen to fit a narrative? At dawn, she dug through the keepsake chest in the guest room closet, the one where Grace kept old report cards, handmade Mother's Day cards, and scribbled finger paintings. It was all there, but something felt off. There were no hospital bracelets, no newborn photos, no birth announcement clipped from the paper. There was a picture of Olivia as a toddler, but nothing before that. The timeline had gaps. She found herself staring at that birth certificate again. It looked real, official, and yet it felt like evidence in a crime scene she hadn't realized she was standing in. Downstairs, Grace moved about the kitchen like nothing had happened. She fried eggs, hummed softly, set 2 plates on the table. Olivia watched her, numb, wondering how many years of her life had been carefully edited like an old film reel. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Olivia finally asked, her voice low. Grace paused, spatula in midair. "Tell you what, exactly?" "That my name wasn't Olivia. That I might not even be your daughter." Grace set the spatula down, slowly. "You are my daughter." "But I wasn't born that way." Silence stretched between them, full of things Grace couldn't bring herself to say. Olivia stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I want answers. Real ones." Grace looked at her with an expression Olivia had never seen before. Not guilt, not regret. It was fear. Not the fear of being caught. The fear of losing everything. Later that afternoon, Olivia drove to the county clerk's office. She requested her birth records. The clerk, a young woman with half-moon glasses, tapped at a keyboard, frowned, then asked Olivia to confirm her birth name again. "I was born Olivia Munro. May 9th, 1997. Grace Munro is my mother." The clerk shook her head. "There's no record of an Olivia Munro born in this county that year." Her mouth went dry. "What about Emily Whitaker?" A pause. More typing. "Then, that record exists, but it's sealed under a private adoption case. Requires special clearance to access." Olivia's world tilted. She stumbled out of the building and sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She wasn't Olivia Munro. At least, not entirely. She was someone else first, someone who had been lost or stolen or hidden, someone who had a name before Grace ever held her. Emily. And that name, so simple, so gentle, was now the key to a version of her life that had been buried for 28 years. The name Emily Rose Whitaker had cracked Olivia's world wide open. But now, it wasn't just about names. It was about legality. About truth. About choice. Hers, and the one taken from a girl nearly 3 decades ago. Back in her apartment that week, Olivia dug deeper. She started with a simple search, expecting nothing. But the moment she entered the name into a genealogy database, something odd surfaced. A closed forum thread from 5 years ago. The post was from a woman named Rachel Whitaker, searching for her daughter, Emily, who she believed was born on May 9, 1997. There were no follow-ups. Just a desperate plea. "If you're out there, I never wanted to give you up. They told me you were gone, but I don't believe them. Please, I'm still looking." The screen blurred as Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what this woman looked like. Didn't know her voice, her story, but somehow she felt her ache through those 10 simple words. Driven by equal parts fear and fury, Olivia returned to Willow Creek and made her way to the dusty back room of the local public library. That's where she found the key, an aging social worker's archive kept in a locked filing cabinet never fully digitized. After some maneuvering and charm, she convinced the clerk to let her scan the records under a false pretense of legal inquiry. Inside a water-damaged manila folder labeled Whitaker, R, Minor Ward, she found a typed incident report dated May 10, 1997. It chronicled the emergency birth of a 16-year-old girl named Rachel Whitaker. No guardian present. No father listed. The girl had entered labor at a home for unwed teens, run by a private religious charity. But the next page is what made Olivia's stomach drop. It wasn't an adoption certificate. It was a note, handwritten by a now retired staff member. Newborn removed from mother's custody within 48 hours. Transferred to temporary care of G. Monroe. No formal documentation on file. Staff instructed to record child as deceased in patient summary at request of external party. Highly irregular. Irregular. The word pounded in her head like a warning bell. There was no legal adoption. No oversight, no process, just a baby, her, taken in the shadows. She sat there, numb, staring at the photocopied page. Grace had taken her, from a terrified teenage girl who had just given birth, who had been told her baby died. The silence of the library was deafening as realization set in. Her very existence in Grace's home had been born of a lie, and possibly a crime. What had Grace done? And more importantly, why? Olivia now knew her childhood began not in a hospital nursery or a courthouse, but in a backroom deal, one that erased another woman's rights, one that rewrote her life before it even began. She folded the pages into her bag and left, the sound of her footsteps echoing behind her like a reckoning. The truth was no longer hiding, and neither was she. The moment Olivia saw her birth mother's face, it was through a grainy news segment from 2006, an old local broadcast covering a missing child vigil on Mother's Day. A younger Rachel Whitaker stood before a small crowd, clutching a faded photograph of a newborn baby and a candle that wouldn't stay lit in the wind. "My daughter was born May 9, 1997, she said, voice shaking but determined. "They told me she died. But no one ever showed me a body, no death certificate. Nothing. I still believe she's out there." The clip lasted 90 seconds. Olivia replayed it 15 times. That night, she messaged a moderator of the closed forum she'd found. Within hours, she was in contact with Rachel's cousin, who confirmed Rachel still lived nearby, never married, no other children, still holding on to hope. The next day, Olivia drove 3 hours through winding back roads and open fields until she reached a modest bungalow in a quiet rural town. Her hands trembled as she knocked. Rachel opened the door. She looked older than Olivia expected. Her eyes were deep-set with years of grief, her hair streaked prematurely with gray, but there was something unmistakable in her expression, an ache that flickered into wonder the moment she saw Olivia's face. "Can I help you?" Rachel asked softly. Olivia struggled for words. I think I might be your daughter." Rachel's hand shot to her mouth. She stumbled back, clutching the doorframe. Her eyes filled instantly, as if the tears had been waiting just behind the surface all these years. Inside, they sat across from one another, barely breathing, until Olivia placed the folded birth certificate and social worker report on the table. Rachel read them silently. Her fingers shook. Then her shoulders collapsed forward and she began to sob. Loud, broken sobs, like 28 years of pain had finally found a place to land. "I knew it," she whispered through tears. "I knew they lied to me." She told Olivia everything. How at 16 she was placed into a foster home after her mother died and had no voice in her own pregnancy. How she gave birth alone, without anesthesia, surrounded by strangers who wouldn't even let her hold her child. How a nurse told her the baby was gone before she'd even named her. And how her foster sister's visitor, Grace Monroe, had come to the facility days before, whispering with the staff behind closed doors. They said she was a family friend. She wasn't, Rachel said bitterly. She watched me cry and said nothing. It wasn't just that Rachel had been tricked. It was that the system, everyone, had conspired to erase her. Rachel reached out tentatively, placing her hand over Olivia's. I never stopped looking. I never stopped believing in you. And Olivia, overwhelmed, didn't pull away. But joy clashed with rage in her chest. Because as Rachel finally began to reclaim her motherhood, Olivia felt something she hadn't expected. Guilt. For not knowing. For loving the woman who had taken her. For being the reason Rachel had suffered for nearly 3 decades. As they sat together, the warmth between them unmistakable, Olivia couldn't help but think of Grace, what she knew, what she hid, and why. Because something still didn't add up. Rachel was not the unstable addict Grace had always described. She was lucid, strong. Damaged, yes, but not dangerous. So what else had Grace lied about? And what exactly had she done to ensure Rachel never got her baby back? The following days were a blur of sleepless nights, long drives, and the constant echo of Rachel's voice in Olivia's head. She couldn't shake it. The pain in her mother's voice, the disbelief, the endless years spent searching for her child. And yet, despite everything, Rachel never once blamed Olivia for the injustice done to her. That's when Olivia began to look at Grace differently. Grace, the woman who had been a mother in every sense of the word for 28 years. The woman who had cooked Olivia's favorite meals, who'd held her after bad dreams, who'd wiped her tears at every heartbreak. Olivia had always seen Grace as a rock, unwavering, steady, an immovable part of her life. But now, as the truths began to surface, so did the cracks in the foundation. Grace's image had always been flawless, warm, generous, benevolent. But beneath the surface, Olivia now realized there was something darker, something Grace had hidden beneath layers of kindness and false promises. The next time Olivia came home, she could feel it. The weight in the air, the tension that made the walls feel too close. Grace had invited her to dinner, as if everything was normal, as if nothing had changed. But Olivia wasn't fooled. Not anymore. She arrived early, letting herself in, the house smelling of roasted chicken and fresh herbs. Grace was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she carefully set the table. She smiled when Olivia walked in, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. "How was your day, sweetie?" Grace asked, her voice almost too cheerful. "Fine," Olivia replied, setting her bag down, keeping her distance. Grace studied her for a long moment, the warmth fading from her face. "Olivia, what's wrong? You've been distant lately." It was then that Olivia knew she had to confront her. Sitting down at the kitchen table, Olivia placed the birth certificate and the social worker's report in front of Grace. Grace's face drained of color the moment she saw them. She didn't even try to hide her reaction. The guilt was written all over her face. Grace looked away, her voice faltering. "You've seen it then." "Why didn't you tell me?" Olivia demanded, the anger that had been simmering inside her now rising to the surface. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Grace sighed deeply, her hands trembling as she clasped them in front of her. "I was trying to protect you. From the truth. From the pain. You don't understand, Liv. I saved you." "Saved me?" Olivia's voice cracked. "From what, Grace? From the truth about who I am. From the truth about you. From Rachel." Grace's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't allow herself to break. She straightened up, forcing a calmness that Olivia knew was just another mask. "Your birth mother." Grace started, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wasn't the person you think she is. She wasn't stable. She wasn't capable of being a mother." "You told me that. But that's not true, is it?" Olivia's voice trembled with the hurt and betrayal building inside her. "Rachel wasn't some drug addict or unstable woman like you said. She was a scared teenager, yes, but she wanted me. She never wanted to give me up, and now I know why you kept me from her. You lied. I didn't lie, Olivia. I protected you. Protected me? Olivia stood up, the words tumbling out faster than she could stop them. From a mother who never stopped looking for me? From a woman who's been through hell because of you? Grace's gaze shifted downward, guilt heavy in her posture. She folded her hands in front of her, a defense mechanism, a way to hold herself together. I wasn't the bad guy here. I gave you a home. I raised you. Your birth mother wasn't fit to be a mother. She didn't even know how to care for you. I had to. You had to what, Grace? Olivia's voice was raw now, her chest tight with unshed tears. You had to take me from her? You had to steal me away because you thought you knew what was best for me? You had to make up lies for 28 years to cover your tracks? Grace's face crumpled in that moment. The facade shattered. The woman who had always seemed so strong, so confident, now looked smaller, fragile. A woman caught in her own web of deceit. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want you to hate me, Grace whispered, her voice trembling. But I made promises. Promises to your birth mother. I kept those promises. I did it for you. For us. For me? Olivia's eyes filled with a new kind of rage, the understanding of Grace's manipulation running deep. What promises? What did you promise her? I promised her that you'd be safe. I promised her that you'd be loved, that you'd never want for anything, and I made sure that no one could take you from me. That's why I did what I did. Grace looked up, her eyes pleading. I did it because I loved you, Olivia. I always have. But Olivia was no longer looking at her the same way. The love that had once seemed unconditional now felt tainted by deception. Every loving gesture, every soft word, every act of care was now under the shadow of a broken promise. Olivia turned her back on Grace, walking slowly to the door. You lied to me, Grace. And you lied to her. She swallowed hard, then added, I don't know if I can forgive you for this. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Grace didn't say anything as Olivia left, the front door clicking shut behind her like the final seal on a past she no longer recognized. Olivia couldn't escape the truth, no matter how hard she tried. Every corner of her life seemed tainted with Grace's lies, yet as the days passed she couldn't help but wonder, how much of this was truly Grace's fault? What had driven a woman who seemed so kind, so selfless, to betray the very foundation of their family? The answers, as Olivia would soon learn, lay in a forgotten promise, a dying woman's final wish. One evening, just a week after the confrontation with Grace, Olivia returned home to find a letter waiting for her. It was from Grace's lawyer, an envelope marked with a heavy wax seal. The moment she opened it, she felt a shiver crawl up her spine. Inside was a faded letter, written in a delicate hand, dated years ago. Olivia, she read aloud, her heart pounding. The letter was addressed to her by name, but from an unexpected sender, Grace's sister, Charlotte Monroe. The words on the page were haunting, each one weighing on Olivia's chest like a heavy stone. My dear Olivia, if you're reading this, then the time has come to tell you the truth, though I wish it weren't so. I promised your mother that I would give you up for adoption, but there was another promise I made, one I couldn't keep. I promised your birth mother that I would help her keep you safe. I couldn't, not in the way I'd hoped. Olivia paused, her breath catching in her throat. It didn't make sense. Grace had always painted Charlotte as a saint, a woman who had supported Grace through thick and thin. But now this? Olivia read on. Grace has always been the stronger one. She took you in when Rachel couldn't, and when I died, I knew I wouldn't be able to fulfill the promise I made to Rachel. But it was too late to tell anyone. I hope that one day you will understand. Please forgive Grace for what she's done. But know this, she acted out of love for you, even if the price was too high. Olivia's hands trembled as she set the letter down. She felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. Anger because Grace had never spoken of this promise before, pity because she now realized how deep Grace's guilt ran. Grace hadn't just betrayed Rachel, she had betrayed herself, carrying the weight of a promise that had doomed all three of them. Olivia went to the hospital the next morning, not to confront Grace, but to seek the one person who might know more, the woman who had witnessed it all. Charlotte Monroe's final days had been spent in a hospice bed, her body ravaged by cancer, but her mind sharp until the very end. Olivia sat in the sterile room, Charlotte's frail hand clasped in hers. She was no longer the towering figure of strength Grace had painted her as, but a woman broken by time and choices she couldn't undo. "Olivia," Charlotte whispered, her voice barely audible, "I know why you're here." "How could you have known?" Olivia asked, her throat tight. Charlotte gave a weak smile, her eyes tired but kind. "You're Grace's daughter, after all. You've got her fire." "And her questions." Olivia hesitated. "You knew everything, didn't you? You knew Grace had stolen me from my real mother, and you helped her. Why?" Charlotte closed her eyes, wincing with the effort. "Not helped. I couldn't help anyone. But I swore to Rachel. I swore I would do everything in my power to keep you from her. She was unstable, Olivia. At least that's what I was told." "But you didn't think she was unstable, did you?" Olivia asked gently. "You didn't believe it." "No," Charlotte admitted, her voice full of regret. "Rachel was a scared girl. She didn't know what to do. But I couldn't fight it. Grace, she was determined." A tear slid down Charlotte's cheek. "She promised Rachel she'd raise you as her own. That promise—" She paused, her breath shallow. "It ate her alive. I knew that. But Grace was my sister. I couldn't go against her." Olivia absorbed the weight of Charlotte's words, her mind racing. The promise had been a death sentence. Grace had buried the truth so deep to protect her own conscience, yet that very act had fractured the bond with her birth mother. Olivia's heart ached, torn between two women who had loved her in different ways but had both failed her in the end. "I'll never forgive her for this," Olivia said, more to herself than to Charlotte. "Forgiveness is a funny thing," Charlotte whispered. "It doesn't come easily, but it's the only way to heal. For all of you." As the minutes passed, Olivia could feel the weight of the history she had inherited settling deeper within her. The past wasn't just something she could dismiss. It was a legacy, a tangled web of secrets, broken promises, and unresolved grief. Grace had kept her promise to Rachel, but not the way either of them had imagined. In the end, she had promised Rachel that Olivia would be safe, loved, and cared for. And she had been, but at what cost? Now it was up to Olivia to decide. Could she forgive Grace and herself for a past that had been constructed on so many lies? Could the promise of healing ever replace the broken trust that had shattered her world? The answer seemed impossible, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. Olivia couldn't shake the weight of the truth she'd uncovered. Each revelation seemed to lead to another, like the layers of a dark, twisted onion that refused to stop peeling. Grace, once the woman Olivia had admired above all others, was now a stranger. The woman who had raised her, loved her, and sacrificed everything for her had built that life on betrayal, blackmail, and a web of lies that reached further than Olivia could have ever imagined. The more she dug, the clearer it became. Grace's devotion to Olivia hadn't been driven solely by love. It had been driven by fear. Fear of losing the daughter she had raised, and, even more than that, fear of the consequences of the truth. Because the truth wasn't just about a young mother who couldn't keep her child. It was about a secret so dangerous, so powerful, that it threatened everything Grace had built. It started with a phone call to a private investigator. Olivia had asked around about the mysterious figure tied to Grace's past. Rachel's birth father, the man Grace had only ever referred to as the man who would ruin everything. The man who, apparently, had the power to destroy both Rachel and Grace's lives. The investigator's file was a thick stack of documents, many of which Olivia could hardly bring herself to read. But there it was, unmistakable. A name that had been hidden in plain sight. Victor Whitaker, Rachel's estranged father. According to the file, Victor Whitaker was an influential businessman, a powerful figure with connections that stretched across the state. A man with everything to lose, especially his reputation. And Grace had known him. They had met years ago, when Rachel was just a teenager, in a less-than-legal arrangement that no one ever spoke about. It wasn't just the adoption that had been secret, it was the leverage Grace had over Rachel's birth father. Olivia spent hours combing through the file. What she uncovered made her stomach churn. Victor Whitaker had been having an affair when Rachel's biological mother, had gotten pregnant. His affair with a younger woman had been the talk of the town, but it had never gone public. When Rachel was born, Victor had refused to acknowledge her as his own. He had wanted nothing to do with the child, and Rachel's mother, devastated and desperate, had been forced to make a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Grace had known all of this, and she had used it. The blackmail had begun long before Olivia was born. When Grace met Rachel's mother, she had promised to rescue the baby, to protect her from a world of uncertainty. What she hadn't told Rachel was that Grace had manipulated the situation to ensure that she would raise Olivia as her own. Rachel's mother had been offered a deal, a choice: give up her child or face the public disgrace of having Victor Whitaker's affair and subsequent paternity scandal exposed. The documents were damning. If they had been released, Victor's entire career would have crumbled. His reputation, his wealth, everything he had built would have been destroyed. Olivia sat back in the chair, staring at the file in disbelief. Grace hadn't just taken her from Rachel. She had blackmailed Rachel's foster mother, her own family, and manipulated a desperate situation to her advantage. The promise she had made to Rachel's birth mother had been nothing more than a manipulation, an excuse to keep Olivia and cement her own position as the only mother she knew. Olivia couldn't breathe. She felt trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the implications of Grace's actions. Everything she had known about Grace, the love, the sacrifices, the years of devotion, had been a lie. Grace had built her family on the foundation of someone else's brokenness. As Olivia began to connect the dots, her anger grew, but beneath the rage was a deeper sorrow, the realization that her entire life had been shaped by the manipulation of a woman she had trusted, a woman who had taken her in, cared for her, and taught her how to love, but had done so under false pretenses. Olivia wasn't just her daughter in Grace's eyes, she was leverage, a bargaining chip in a game neither of them had been willing to face. It wasn't long before Olivia reached out to Rachel, the two of them meeting in a quiet park far away from Grace's reach. Rachel's eyes were still red from the last time they had spoken, but her determination was clear. She wanted her daughter back, and now Olivia wanted answers. "I found something," Olivia said, handing Rachel the file. She watched as Rachel's hands shook when she opened it, her expression falling as she absorbed the information. "I knew she had something over me," Rachel whispered, her voice hollow, "but I never knew it was this bad. I thought she was just trying to help, trying to make it right." Olivia took a deep breath. She wasn't trying to make anything right. She was covering up something she couldn't control. She was holding on to me because of the power I gave her. And all these years, she's kept you from me. Not out of love, but out of fear. Rachel's gaze darkened. Fear of what? "Fear of losing me," Olivia said quietly. "But not just losing me. Losing the secret she'd kept buried for so long." Rachel swallowed hard, her face pale. This is what you found? This is why she kept me away?" Olivia nodded. "I'm so sorry. You deserve so much more than what she's done to you." Rachel looked away, tears gathering in her eyes. "I don't know if I can forgive her for this, but I want my daughter back." And Olivia, standing there with her birth mother, realized that this was her turning point. She had no choice but to face the truth, the ugly, painful truth about her life. She had to decide whether to stand with Rachel, to stand for the woman who had never stopped loving her, or to stay with the woman who had betrayed them both. The choices felt impossible, but for the first time, Olivia could see the path ahead, even if it was shrouded in darkness. Olivia once believed there could be healing after the truth. That somehow, if she understood what had happened, why Grace did what she did, why Rachel had disappeared from her life, she could mend the pieces into something that resembled peace. But now, she saw how naive that hope had been. The revelation of Grace's blackmail had ignited a wildfire. Rachel, once cautious and patient, was now determined. She wasn't just asking for her daughter back, she was fighting for her. Olivia found herself in the center of a storm she hadn't created but now had to survive. The air at Grace's house had changed. Gone were the comforting scents of lavender and old books. In their place lingered a tense, sour silence. Grace wandered the halls like a ghost, avoiding Olivia's eyes, offering short, clipped apologies without substance. Her once graceful posture was stooped, her voice small. "I was trying to protect you," she murmured one night over untouched tea. "I know what I did was wrong, but I never stopped loving you, Olivia. Never." "But you didn't just lie to me," Olivia said, her voice sharp, trembling. "You stole me. You told me my mother was dead, Grace. You let me grieve a woman who was very much alive." Grace's face crumpled like paper. "If I could undo it, I would, but I was all you had, Olivia. I gave you everything." "But it wasn't yours to give," Olivia shouted, finally unleashing the fury she'd held in for weeks. "My life was never yours to rewrite." That night, Olivia left. She moved into a hotel on the edge of town, needing space from both women. Rachel called her daily, sometimes leaving long voicemails that were part apology, part desperation, part motherly longing. Olivia listened, but rarely replied. She couldn't. Not yet. Caught between two women who claimed to love her, Olivia felt more orphaned than ever. But the universe wasn't done unraveling. The next twist came in the form of an unannounced visitor. A lean man in his early 60s, dressed in a crisp navy suit, showed up at the hotel front desk asking for her by her birth name, Emily. He introduced himself as James Caldwell, a retired attorney who once handled the estate affairs of a woman named Charlotte Monroe. His voice was calm but tight, as if each word was carefully measured. In his hand was an envelope marked for Emily when she's ready. Inside, Olivia found a DNA report and a second letter from Charlotte, only this one wasn't dated decades ago. It had been sealed just a month before her death. "There is one more truth I couldn't bear to carry to my grave," Charlotte wrote, "and I didn't trust Grace to tell you, even if she promised she would." The DNA report was clear. Victor Whitaker was not Olivia's biological grandfather, but the real shock came in the addendum. Another name had been tested, a man named Jonathan Bell, and the match was conclusive. Jonathan Bell was Olivia's biological father, a name Olivia had never heard before, a man Rachel had never mentioned. She immediately called Rachel, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me about Jonathan Bell?" There was a long silence on the line before Rachel answered. "Because I didn't know," Rachel said quietly. "I never knew who your father was. I was assaulted, Olivia. I never talked about it because I didn't know what to say. I didn't want you to grow up with that weight. I wanted you to live free of that shadow." Olivia felt the floor fall out from under her. The rage she had carried for so long now mixed with something far more painful: sorrow, confusion, and fear. The past wasn't just a mess, it was a minefield, and she was stepping on one explosive after another. She hung up the phone and sat in the darkness of her hotel room, the glow from the streetlight outside casting warped shadows across the walls. She thought of Grace, of all the secrets she had hoarded to build a life that had never truly belonged to her. She thought of Rachel, wounded and searching, trying to piece together her own shattered memory of what had happened all those years ago. And she thought of herself, Olivia, or Emily, or whoever she truly was, standing at the jagged intersection of love, deception, and legacy. Now, with Mother's Day approaching once more, Olivia knew what she had to do. She would bring them all together. Grace, Rachel, herself, and someone else. Someone who might hold the final piece to this brutal puzzle. The showdown was coming, and this time, no one would leave with clean hands. The table was set for 3, but Olivia had arranged 5 chairs. Mother's Day had arrived again, so achingly familiar yet entirely different. The sun streamed gently through the dining room windows of a rented lake house, far from the quiet street of Grace's home and Rachel's suburban apartment. The house wasn't home to anyone, and that was the point. It was neutral ground, a stage for truth, for reckoning. Grace arrived first, dressed in soft pastels, her hands nervously clutching a bouquet of lilies, the same ones she'd given Olivia every year since childhood. But the flowers now felt like a hollow gesture, a relic from a life built on silences. Rachel followed, her energy sharper. She wore black. Not out of mourning, Olivia suspected, but defiance. The years had hardened her in some ways, but there was still a softness in her gaze whenever she looked at Olivia. A sadness, too. A hope tinged with grief. They sat across from each other, the silence as thick as the unspoken years between them. "I'm not here to referee," Olivia began, her voice steady. "I'm here to finish this. I need to know who I am. And I need you both to stop rewriting my life for me." She pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Inside, the forged death certificate, the social worker's journal, the blackmail documents, the DNA results. Every piece of the shattered puzzle now laid bare. And then, Olivia said the words that made Grace drop her gaze and Rachel grip the edge of her chair. "I invited someone else." The door opened. In walked a man with graying hair and cautious eyes. Jonathan Bell. Rachel stood up so quickly her chair toppled. "Him? Why is he here?" Olivia looked at her, then at Grace. "Because he's my father." Jonathan stepped forward slowly. "I didn't know," he said gently. "Not until recently. I received a letter after Charlotte passed. She asked me to take a DNA test. Said I might have a daughter I never knew." Rachel's face drained of color. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I don't remember him." Grace looked stricken. "Rachel, there's something I need to tell you. Something I never had the right to say." She swallowed, trembling. "The night you came to Charlotte after everything that happened, you were drugged. You didn't remember how you got pregnant. But Charlotte did. She told me the truth when she was dying." She turned to Olivia. "Jonathan was a friend of Charlotte's husband. He stayed in the house briefly during those months. There was no assault, no crime. It was a drunken mistake. But Charlotte panicked. She didn't want her husband to find out. So she erased it, from your memory and from the record. She blamed someone else, told you something happened that didn't." Rachel sank slowly into her chair, hands over her mouth, eyes wide with horror. "I believed I was a victim," she whispered. "For all these years." Jonathan looked devastated. "If I had known, I swear, I never would have walked away." Olivia sat back, dizzy from the emotional whiplash. Her entire life had been rewritten, reinterpreted, again and again by women trying to control the narrative, trying to protect her, or themselves. She took a long breath. "I've spent my whole life caught in your war, and I'm done being the battlefield." She looked at Grace. "You lied. You manipulated. You stole a child and told yourself it was love." Then she turned to Rachel. "You abandoned your truth. You gave your power to other people and let silence take its place. I don't blame you, but I'm not here to fix it." And finally, she turned to Jonathan. "I don't know you, but I'll decide if I want to." Then she stood up and reached into her bag. "This," she said, holding up a letter, "is from Charlotte, her final confession. She gave it to her lawyer the day she died, with instructions to give it to me when I was ready." She unfolded the note. "I was the architect of all this pain. I couldn't live with the guilt of stealing your truth, Olivia. I let my sister keep you. I let Rachel believe lies. And I let Jonathan disappear, even though he wanted to stay. I made decisions out of fear, and in doing so, I broke every promise I ever made. Please don't let my cowardice become your inheritance." Silence fell. For the first time, no one had anything to say, and then Olivia walked to the door. "I'm not choosing sides today," she said, "because I'm choosing myself." She walked out into the sunlight, leaving behind the wreckage, but carrying forward her own truth, finally hers to hold.